especial a su presidenta, Rosa García, presidenta de muchas cosas, entre ellas de la Cámara, y amiga del Círculo, que esto es muy importante para nosotros, por habernos brindado la oportunidad de organizar conjuntamente esta sesión sobre el futuro de la Unión Europea. También agradecemos al embajador Temple su asistencia y confiamos en verle en las próximas semanas ocupando nuestra tribuna para acercarnos al nuevo escenario político que tenéis ahora en Alemania, ¿no? Tras las elecciones del pasado domingo. Estamos muy interesados. El debate acerca del futuro de la Unión Europea resulta especialmente oportuno y este será uno de los ejes principales de la actuación del Círculo en este nuevo curso académico que hemos iniciado estos días. La salida de la crisis abre una nueva etapa que debemos aprovechar para avanzar en la consolidación del proyecto europeo. Sin embargo, pese a la mejora económica, el reto es enorme, ¿no? Pues en los próximos tiempos, como todos ustedes conocen, pues la Unión Europea se enfrenta al Brexit, tiene que reforzar la zona euro, sin que ello represente una quiebra insalvable entre los países miembros de dicha zona y el resto de socios. En la Unión estamos descubriendo cómo la fractura este-oeste puede resultar más profunda que la tradicional norte-sur y obligados a responder a la creciente exigencia ciudadana para recuperar la agenda social europea y para hacer frente a la consolidación de movimientos antieuropeos y xenófobos que se está dando, ¿no? En este sentido, las recientes elecciones en Alemania, Holanda y Francia nos han dado un respiro, esperemos, pero la amenaza sigue y es muy activa. Para abordar algunas de estas cuestiones, hemos organizado conjuntamente la sesión de esta tarde, en la que contamos con reconocidos expertos a los que quiero agradecer su gentileza al aceptar nuestra invitación. Y antes de pasarle la palabra a la presidenta de la Cámara de Comercio alemana, querría ir más allá del acto puntual de este centenario y agradecer al empresariado alemán su extraordinaria contribución al progreso de nuestra economía. A lo largo de este siglo han sido muchas las compañías alemanas que se han instalado y se han arraigado entre nosotros. Algunas de ellas son de las más relevantes del país. También aprovechar la presencia del embajador para, mirando atrás, el Círculo va a celebrar el año que viene el 60 aniversario, reconocer la contribución alemana que se hizo a nuestra transición política y a la consolidación de la democracia en la década de los 70. Tengo la sensación que desde España no se ha reconocido como se merece esa contribución que resultó tan fundamental. Sería injusto que quedara en el olvido. Y, cómo no, mirando al futuro, los mejores deseos para la Cámara de Comercio Alemana en España.
Muy bien, pues, estimado Juan José, presidente del Círculo de Economía, lo primero de todo, muchísimas gracias por estas palabras tan amables y sobre todo porque nos has permitido, nos has acogido esta tarde en la sede, que empieza nuestro encuentro empresarial hispano-alemán en un año tan especial como el año 2017, que, como muy bien decía Juan José, es nuestro aniversario. Quiero saludar al embajador de la República Federal de Alemania, Peter Temple, que nos honra hoy con su presencia y que va a participar inmediatamente después también en la mesa redonda que seguirá a la presentación del profesor Fust. También quiero agradecer y saludar a los representantes del resto de las organizaciones colaboradoras en este evento que empieza hoy, pero que tendrá en el día de mañana también su culminación, ¿no? Como por ejemplo el ICEX Invest in Spain, ESADE, IESE, la Cámara de Comercio de Barcelona, Fomento del Trabajo y luego el proyecto de Creciendo, ¿no? Saludo también a todos los amigos y a los socios de la Cámara de Comercio que nos hemos reunido hoy aquí, porque vosotros sois la base de la actividad de la Asociación de los Empresarios de la Cámara Alemana, ¿no? Y me gusta venir a celebrar aquí, por eso hemos hecho el gran evento en Barcelona, porque fue aquí, en esta ciudad, donde nació la Cámara hace 100 años, ¿no? ¡Qué historia! Que no se nos olvide, también tenemos que agradecer a las muchas empresas asociadas que han hecho posible todas las actividades especiales que pasan en un año como este, que es el centenario. Y ahí tenemos a los patrocinadores, ¿no? Bueno, mi agradecimiento, como decía Juan José, a todos los amigos que nos han brindado su tiempo para hacer esta mesa redonda tan especial, ¿no? Donde vamos a entender o a ver cuál es su visión y su experiencia, no solamente sobre la Unión Europea y por qué celebrarla, sino también sobre su futuro, ¿no? Como el profesor Fust y luego el embajador Peter Temple, Alfredo Pastor y Josep Piqué, ¿no? Y abrimos este evento mirando hacia el futuro, mirando a lo que nos es común, ¿no? A algo que por lo que deberíamos estar apasionados como españoles de Madrid, de Cataluña, de cualquier parte, como ciudadanos alemanes, muchos, como ciudadanos europeos, ¿no? Y que a pesar de que los acontecimientos actuales que está constantemente en los medios de comunicación están centrando nuestra atención estos días en Cataluña y en España, pues hoy no es el día de pensar hacia adentro, sino que queremos centrar nuestra atención en los avatares, no los nacionales, sino preguntarnos acerca del futuro de Europa, ¿no? En un lugar donde estamos integrados absolutamente todos y que definitivamente tenemos que identificar hoy, ¿no? ¿Cuál es ese futuro de esa Europa? Mañana, como os contaba, seguirá el evento y espero contar con todos vosotros. Y mañana ya no miraremos el contexto, sino miraremos las empresas y veremos cuáles son las claves del éxito para cualquier tipo de empresa, cómo hacerlas crecer, ¿no? Y bueno, un recuerdo particular, ¿no? Somos europeos, Europa es nuestra historia, es un movimiento socioeconómico, es un movimiento político actual y es algo realmente importante para el futuro, ¿no? Como os decía, nos interesa por todo, nos interesa como personas, individuos, como padres, como madres, como ciudadanos y, ¿por qué no?, y muy importante, como empresarios, no se nos tiene que olvidar, ¿no? Realmente, cuando uno va siguiendo las noticias que han pasado en los últimos meses, ¿no?, pues te das cuenta que tanto las nacionales como las europeas, como las mundiales, nos sentimos, yo no sé vosotros, pero yo tremendamente sobrecogida, porque todo lo que parecía seguro, pues últimamente se está volviendo líquido, ¿no? Y yo no sé, pero creo que nos embarga una situación a ratos, ¿no?, de hacia dónde debemos llevar esa Unión Europea que, como os decía, nos abraza. Porque estamos aquí hoy porque Europa nos importa y nos importa a cada uno de nosotros, ¿no? Es el lugar donde se marca la actividad económica y financiera de los empresarios, ¿no? Es un lugar donde se aprueban todas las iniciativas, la mayor parte de las leyes surgen de Europa, el mercado único en el que vivimos es el europeo, somos más de 500 millones de personas y todo está configurado a través de esta Europa que en este momento, como muy bien decían, se está siendo convulsionándose, ¿no? ¿Cuál es la solución? Pues depende, ¿no? Si miráramos últimamente los titulares del último periódico que leía, decía más euro, más Bruselas o más dinero, decía el titular, como respuesta o como resumen de lo que había contado el presidente de la Comisión Europea, ¿no? Bueno, pues quizá lo que nos falta es esa visión que nos entusiasma, esa visión del hombre europeo de hoy, porque estamos beneficiándonos de esa aparente estabilidad económica de hoy. No está tan claro que esa estabilidad económica se vaya a transmitir en el mañana y sobre todo nos falta una visión distinta de la económica de Europa, ¿no? Hay muchas luces, hay muchas sombras, hay mucha parálisis, hay muchas dudas. Yo estoy realmente muy interesada en escuchar a los ponentes, y por esto me voy a callar ya, acerca de cuáles son sus propuestas, esas propuestas convincentes que nos van a hacer salir de aquí esta noche mucho más europeos. Muchas gracias.
Tengo el honor de presentar brevemente a nuestro invitado de honor, profesor Clemens Fuest. Se escribe con UE, que normalmente sería U, pero no se pronuncia así para los que no saben, es Fuest, como con acento en la U, y se pronuncia bien. Muchos de los asistentes de habla española probablemente han topado con él en periódicos españoles en noticias relacionadas con políticas económicas y financieras europeas. Este año se han hecho eco de sus posicionamientos en varias ocasiones: El País, ABC, 5 Días o Expansión. Profesor Fuest es presidente del prestigioso IFO-Institut de Múnich desde 2016. Parecía difícil que el sucesor de Hans-Werner Sinn como presidente del IFO-Institut, con sus a veces incómodas posicionamientos en política europea y en particular de las políticas del Banco Central Europeo, podría tener una influencia mayor en el debate político y en los medios. Pero el profesor Fuest lo ha conseguido. Muchos de los asistentes de habla alemana, al menos esta tarde, sabrán que a principios de este mes, el 2 de septiembre para ser precisos, Clemens Fuest fue elegido por la Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung como el economista más influyente entre los 30 economistas más prestigiosos de Alemania y Suiza. Compartió, de hecho, la primera plaza con el profesor Ernst Fehr de la Universidad de Zúrich. ¿Qué le ha valido este puesto? Me aventuraré a dar una explicación centrada en su currículum y una segunda explicación centrada en su persona. Permítanme presentar brevísimamente su currículum vitae. Nace en 1968 en Münster, realiza estudios de economía en las universidades de Bochum y Mannheim, se doctora en Colonia, se habilita como profesor universitario en la Universidad de Múnich en el año 2000. Posteriormente enseña en las universidades de Colonia, Oxford y Mannheim. Hoy es profesor de Económicas VWL en la Universidad de Múnich. En el 2016 fue elegido presidente del prestigioso IFO-Institut. Es miembro consejero de un gran número de instituciones, consejos, círculos que aquí no podemos enumerar, donde su consejo y saber como economista de renombre se aprecia. Sus especialidades de investigación se centran en política, económica y financiera, fiscalidad nacional e internacional, financiación empresarial, políticas sociales y del mercado de trabajo. Este amplio abanico de investigación posibilita una visión comprensiva, integradora de la realidad sociopolítico-económica. Visión a la vez amplia que respetuosa con el detalle. Visión dirigida a buscar lo que puede tener validez más general, no niega la complejidad de la realidad y busca siempre diferenciar. Esta duplicidad de planteamiento probablemente sea una de las causas de haberse ganado el puesto de economista más influyente al que me acabo de referir. Si a este tipo de conocimiento comprensivo se le añade un talante personal, pausado, reflexivo, que huye del estereotipo fácil, tenemos quizás los dos ingredientes más importantes que explican su éxito. Gracias, profesor Fuest, por estar hoy con nosotros. Esperamos con mucho interés su visión del futuro de la Unión Europea y la discusión posterior.
Buenas tardes. Desafortunadamente mi español no es suficiente para hacer esa presentación sobre temas serios como la Unión Europea y todo eso, así que voy a hablar inglés. First of all, let me thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. I would like to congratulate the Chamber of Commerce for spending 100 years here. So, the companies, trade were here before the European Union was here. And a lot of, what's going on in trade really supports and complements political integration. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight and talk about the European Union. I just had to think about a moment a year ago, a moment I spent in the European Parliament, in fact. I was supposed to present some material there about our budget. I was a member of a commission that was supposed to come up with proposals on how we might reform the budget. And this was a conference with members of Parliament from the different countries, and a member of Parliament from Spain, a lady. I had just presented some proposals we had produced, and a lady from Spain told me something like this: you sit there and tell us about the EU budget. Why don't you go home and tell your government to bring down its surplus and to stop austerity in Europe? And I thought, wow, this is wasn't our subject here, and I didn't feel personally responsible for what the German government had or had not done. But at the same time, I thought, this is great, because this person was angry, but I thought, this is great that we all come together in Brussels, sit there in our parliament, and talk about our union. I think this is really something fantastic. So, if you are angry with what I have to say today, don't hesitate to express that. I think that's fabulous. We don't shoot at each other, we talk to each other. And my personal view is that to be frank and to be open about things you are angry about, there needs to be a certain degree of familiarity. I personally think that's how we should talk to each other in Europe. We should be very open about our concerns, and we shouldn't be too polite, because otherwise we are not going to solve the issues we would like to solve. Okay, so today, the subject of this talk is the future of the EU. This is a very broad subject. What I'd like to do is talk very briefly about 5 issues. First of all, the current economic recovery. Is the crisis over? What should we think about it? Then a few words about economic divergence within Europe. There is, as we'll see in a minute, and as I'm sure you know, there is a general economic recovery in Europe at the moment, but does it reach everybody, and how solid is it? Then, as I said, economic divergence is a problem, I believe, maybe an underestimated problem in Europe. And the question is, what can the EU do about this? Third point. Fourth point, a few words about the Eurozone. I guess you've all heard or read in the newspapers that Emmanuel Macron gave a speech at the Sorbonne yesterday, outlining some ideas for the future of Europe, but also for the reform of the Eurozone. And there is currently, there are talks going on about Eurozone reform, talks involving the French and the German government and the Spanish government and the Italian government. Just my perspective on what needs to be done, and then importantly, further potential for European cooperation, something we should talk more about. This is quite a number of slides. I apologize. It's a bit, like a classroom, difficult at this hour of the day, but I hope you bear with me. So let's take a look at the current recovery. What you see here is real GDP of the euro area since the year 2000. So we see the crisis here. So how far have we recovered? In 2015, the euro area as a whole reached the level of before the crisis. So in that sense, the crisis is over. What we also see in this graph is that we will never reach the old growth trend. Okay, so this crisis was a major setback. We will feel it for a long time, but in some ways, at least we are above the level we had reached before the crisis. So in that sense, you can say the crisis is over. Other countries did a bit better. So here you see the EU, the yellow line or the blue line, the overall group of advanced economies, basically the OECD countries, and they recovered more quickly from the crisis than the Eurozone. So this is something we should think about when we think about reforming the Eurozone. Here is employment, a similar thing. Employment today in the euro area is higher than before the crisis, and this is a major success. Of course, this is the entire Eurozone, but still, there is of course a lot of unemployment, and things need to be done about this. But if we look at overall employment, we are now at higher levels of employment. These are employed people in the euro area than before the crisis. The advanced employment growth in the other advanced economies was slower before the crisis, but quicker after the crisis. So again, we are lagging behind a little bit. These are the current accounts. So before the crisis, many countries, including Spain, had large current account deficits. So capital was flowing into these countries and foreign debt was growing. And what we see here is that this trend, which was unsustainable, has been reversed. So countries like Italy, Spain, Greece have adjusted with a lot of pain, but today the current accounts are more or less balanced, which is good news. This was necessary. This was a necessary adjustment. It means that the level of foreign debt is at least not growing anymore. It's not really declining very fast, but it's not growing anymore. This is the current account of Germany here. What you see is that Germany started in the Eurozone with a balanced current account, and then produced a surplus, which is now 8% of GDP. So there wasn't, on the German side, there was no adjustment. We still have this current account, and maybe we want to discuss, about the relevance of this. Basically, German exports shifted from the Eurozone to other countries outside Europe, but the surplus is still there. So, the recovery is there, but the question is, are we prepared for the next downturn, and is this recovery sustainable? One of the issues is that the level of public debt you see in this graph is now a lot higher. So we went into the crisis with an average level of public debt in the Eurozone of about 65% of GDP, and we are now at close to 100% of GDP. Of course, our reserves are much smaller now. Our ability to act in the next crisis is probably much smaller than it was in 2007, and that's something we need to certainly need to deal with. This is something that is true for other industrialized countries as well, as you see here, but that doesn't really make things better. All of this would be a lot less dangerous if, at least other countries had more reserves or more room to address the next crisis, but they don't. Let's take a look at economic divergence within Europe. So we've seen, on average, we are out of the crisis, but how is Europe doing generally when we look at individual member countries? What you see here is real GDP since the introduction of the euro in France and Germany, and you see it's very similar. So in the early phase of the euro, France grew more quickly than Germany. Germany, was considered as the sick man of Europe, high unemployment, low growth rates, and this was reversed. But what you see here is that Germany is not the great winner of the euro. You see it here, at least not if you compare GDP levels. It's a bit like, the development is very similar to that of France. Recently, higher growth rate, but not much more is happening. Here is Spain, so you are all aware of the big boom after the introduction of the euro, mostly driven by the construction sector, then a tough and deep crisis, and currently the recovery. So it's really a boom-bust story. But if you look at the level, it doesn't look so bad. And finally, Italy, a totally different story. Italy, the real GDP in Italy is now the same as 20 years ago. Zero growth over 2 decades. This is a unique development in the history of industrialized countries, and a matter of concern for the Eurozone and the future of our currency and many other things. I will come back to that. So a lot of divergence, and we also have divergence in levels of public debt. As you know, Italian public debt is now at 135% of GDP, and Spanish debt, increased massively in the crisis, as you know, currently stabilizes, but is at 100% of GDP, and French debt, very similar. Germany is the only large country where government debt is, slowly going down. So a divergent development, really, in this area. And what I found most striking is, not so much these short-term developments, short-term recovery, but what I find most striking is this graph here. It's a graph about long-term productivity divergence. Long-term, so productivity is basically, you divide what you produce by the number of hours or by the number of workers. What does one worker produce in an hour or in a day? This is the source of prosperity. That's why it's so important. The basis of prosperity is very simple. It's productivity. And it's interesting to look at labor productivity and the way it has developed in the last 50 years. What you have here is Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. And what I find interesting about this graph, so this is normalized for 1995, and what I find interesting about this graph is that there are so few differences. There are people, who for instance, people in Germany who think that, because we have this large industrial sector or because we have all these medium-sized companies, the German economy is somehow more productive or more solid than the economy of other countries. But it's wrong. This is simply wrong. You see that if you look at productivity developments, the differences are not very large. Differences to France, the UK are not very large. So productivity growth is very similar between these countries. Of course, there are short-term differences like you see here in the UK, but not very much. Now let's take a look at Italy. In Italy, it was, well, pretty much the same until the early 1990s. And then something happened. I sometimes call this the Italian question because I think it is the most important question about economic policy in Italy. What happened? You see that productivity stopped to grow in the early 1990s. And this is a disaster because, as I said, this is the basis of prosperity. And we are now in the third decade where there is no productivity growth in Italy. Per capita income in Italy is now 7% below the level of the year 2000. I have to say I have a lot of admiration for the political stability of this country because, how would, I don't know, Germany would be a totally different place, also politically, if we had gone through this kind of economic development. And now let's take a look at Spain. Here is Spain. It's very similar. Spain has had a lot of immigration in between, so if you look at GDP numbers, it doesn't look that bad. But if you look at productivity, the development, interestingly, is similar. In the early 1990s, something happened. And productivity stopped to grow in Spain for 15 years. And now, since the crisis, of course, this has to do with the construction sector, with the enormous boom in the construction sector, low productivity jobs in the construction sector. You know much more about that than I do. Since the crisis, productivity has started to grow in Spain. And this is a very important process, and I think it is important in Europe, if we think about addressing economic divergence, to understand these developments, because we need to bring all countries, certainly all major countries, back to reasonable productivity growth to address the issues, to achieve convergence in the long term. Convergence of per capita incomes and generally economic convergence is one of the declared objectives of the EU, but it's not working. And what you see here is per capita income in Southern Europe. So I've put together Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and France here. What you see here is the development of per capita income in percent of the North. The North is, the usual suspects, Germany, Austria, Belgium, the UK, and these northern countries. And this graph starts in 1980. And what you see here is there is no convergence. There is not only no convergence, there is divergence. So in 1980, per capita income this is in purchasing power parity, was in the South was 80%, almost 80% of the North. Today it is, something like 50, between 50 and 60. The idea was that Europe would do the opposite, right? We just cannot go on in this way. So, I don't think the Eurozone and the EU can be stable if we continue along this path. Okay, let's take a look at Spain. This is Spanish per capita income. Spain, as I've just shown you, in terms of GDP, had a huge boom after the introduction of the euro, and everything is fine. We currently have a recovery, but the long-term trend in Spain is not different from the rest of Southern Europe. In 1980s, in terms of purchasing power parity, you can discuss the way you measure this. But what these numbers say is that per capita income in 1980 was 70% of the North, and today it's 60. This has to do with various things. In 1980, the United Kingdom was in difficulties, had a very low per capita income. This is one of the reasons you have this kind of picture. But still, we certainly don't have convergence. But, it's more a trend towards divergence, and we need to do something about this. What can the EU do about this? I guess two things. What you see here is the structure of the EU budget. So the EU budget, which is not very large, 1% basically of EU GDP, started as a budget for agricultural subsidies and slowly changed, so the share of agricultural spending declined and the share of structural policies, so regional policies, increased. So the idea here is that we bring, we try to achieve convergence by spending money on regional policies. And does that help? So there are different views about this. For instance, in its assessment of regional policy between 2007 and 2013, the European Commission argued that you spend €1 in regional policy, and this gives you 2.7 euros in terms of GDP. The trouble is in these regions, right? The trouble is, this comes from a simulation model, not from actually looking at the statistics and the outcomes. So there are studies looking at the outcomes, and they go more like, €1. The optimistic ones generate 1.2 euros in terms of GDP. Okay, so you don't lose money, but you don't gain much. Whatever you get here, it's very heterogeneous across regions. That's one of the instruments we have in the EU, and we should think about how we use it. I've repeatedly said, one reason why this policy isn't very effective is that we are spending money on weird things. First of all, we are spending a lot of money in Germany, although Germany isn't really one of the poor countries. And we are spending millions on, for instance, on water tanks. The renovation of water tanks in Germany. What does that have to do with the EU or with convergence? I don't know. We are spending millions on the renovation of market squares in Dortmund, for instance. Another project, 2 million for the transformation of a rotten swimming pool in the city of Pforzheim. This city is in one of the richest regions in Europe. And the EU spends its money on transforming the swimming pool into offices for young entrepreneurs. I think this is not a project for Europe, not even for the federal government in Germany. It's not even a project really for the city of Pforzheim. It's more like for private investors. Okay, maybe it's a good idea, but we should think about how we spend this money. We spend this money on transforming brownland sites in the city of Nuremberg. Why? I can tell you why. It's about the budgetary process. So we all send money to Brussels, and then all our finance ministers come and they say we want to get back as much as we can. And if these are more or less useless projects, it doesn't matter, because better we transform €1 into 50 cents in our country than transforming €1 into whatever in another country, which doesn't help me. Okay. So I think we can improve on that in Europe. The other instrument we have is the European semester. This is something we invented after the crisis. And the process, countries send a letter to Brussels explaining what they do in economic policy. And then it's being discussed. The European Commission makes, in my view, very reasonable recommendations. And then they send this back to the member states, and the member states decide what to do about it. And what you see here is, this comes from the European Commission, the effectiveness of these recommendations. And you see, the green bars tell you where, areas where there is progress, so where member states have really reacted and implemented the recommendations. And there is very little progress. And compliance with these recommendations is declining over time. So it's not a very effective process. I still think it's useful, but it's not very, very effective. Okay, so these are the two instruments for convergence we currently have, and it's not working great. Okay, let me come to the Eurozone and what we can do about it. Emmanuel Macron has said repeatedly that he has 3 ideas for the Eurozone. He wants a Eurozone parliament. He wants a Eurozone budget. So a budget at the central level, and he wants a Eurozone finance minister. These are his 3 ideas. I think none of these ideas will solve the problem of the Eurozone. We need to do something completely different. And one thing we need is think about the governance, very basic principles of governance in the Eurozone that are violated at the moment. I think it's useful to start thinking about governance using this little matrix. I'm sorry, it's a bit, comes across as a bit academic, but I really think it's relevant. On the horizontal axis of this matrix, you have control over fiscal policy. So who makes decisions over fiscal policy? We could do that at the European level, or we can do it at the national level. And the vertical axis is liability for government debt. So who pays for these decisions, basically? Okay, we can have that at the European level or at the national level. And one possible governance is a centralized fiscal union, where we would say, okay, we put liability for government debt to the European level, mutualize government debt, maybe also things in banking. If we do that, we should also have central control, European control over public spending and over government debt. Okay, and if you do that, we have what you might call a centralized fiscal union. You may like that or not, but it's a meaningful form of governance. It's not obviously stupid. You could say it's not realistic. I personally think it's unrealistic, but a lot of people think that that is the future of Europe and of the Eurozone. I don't think this is the future of the Eurozone for a very simple reason. It would require the Spanish Parliament to give up its right to issue debt or determine the budget. It's as simple as that. It would have to be passed on to the European Parliament or to the new Eurozone Parliament. The Bundestag would have to do the same. The French Assemblée Nationale would say, okay, we stop doing the budget, the national budget, or essential parts of it, and it is going to be the European Parliament. It's a possibility, but nobody wants this at the moment in Europe, and it's not going to happen. Because it's not going to happen, we might think about a decentralized fiscal union. That was how we started the Eurozone. The idea was, okay, liability for government debt remains national. The national governments will have to respond for the debt, and we had the no bailout rule. So if something goes wrong, the creditors lose their money. And countries go into restructuring. And if you have that, you can have national parliaments deciding on the budget, but only under this condition. Now, currently, we are moving more and more towards the, I would say, upper right corner here. So there is increasing joint liability. The European Central Bank is buying government debt increasingly, and we have the ESM and all these mechanisms. So we are increasingly mutualizing government debt, but we still have our national parliaments who want to make decisions about government debt, and they complain. If somebody in Brussels tells them what to do, they complain and say, get lost. We have democratic legitimacy, and you don't. Okay, and that is an arrangement that doesn't work. That's a governance that doesn't work. It's like if you think of your friends. Assume that some of these friends are in economic difficulties, and you would just say, okay, I'll give you my credit card. We will put our finances together and on one bank account, and everybody will have a credit card. If you do that, I'm sure you want to have control over what your friends spend. Do they go to the restaurant? Do they go to holidays? You want to know about that. Before you would have said, okay, you pay for it. You can say, okay, you go on holidays to Thailand or whatever because you pay for it. But if it's your credit card, you don't like that. Okay, so that is the difficulty about mutualizing government debt. If you respond for somebody's debt, you have to take away his liberty. It's as simple as that. Okay, so liberty, autonomy, democratic decisions about national government debt are incompatible with debt mutualization, and that's why it's not going to happen in Europe. Of course, you can have intermediate things here and come up with all kinds of tricks. But, for the basics, I think we need to be aware that we are living in this kind of conflict, and we have to make a choice. Okay, and I think, the only reasonable governance is a form of decentralized fiscal union. Why does the centralized fiscal union not work? As I said, the Eurozone is special. It's different from the American currency union. It consists of sovereign states. And these states will not respect fiscal rules if they do not want to. Fiscal rules are not binding. And, I don't moralize about this. I just think we have to understand it. I don't moralize about this at all. I think it's a very simple principle of international politics, but it's something we need to understand. Fiscal rules, the European semester is an exchange of views, very useful, but it's not something, but it can never be the basis of, things like joint liability or anything. This will lead to disaster. Let me show why I think that fiscal rules don't work. Since the introduction, we had this 3% limit for the budget deficit in the Eurozone. And since the introduction of the euro, this rule has been violated 168 times. 100 and, in approximately 50 cases, there was a recession in the country. And, the rule said if you have a recession, so shrinking GDP, you can have a higher deficit. That's fine. But in 117 cases, it wasn't allowed. And my own country, Germany, was among the first to violate this and to basically undermine the whole process of supervision. It's not like, certain countries are sinners and others aren't. We are all sinners. And it's no surprise because we are all sovereign countries. It's, the Germans and the French, as you may remember, were among the first to deal a blow to our fiscal rules. And, they are gone. Then after the crisis, you may remember that there were some reforms. The idea was, we will introduce the European semester and everything will be better. Okay, so let me show you how the European semester works. And I will take an example from France. It's nothing personal against France. I'm a great fan of France. But half of my family is French, so you allow me to look at France in that case. So here is how the European semester works. So the stability program 2013 was this. This was about the structural deficit of France. Okay, what will their fiscal policy be? That's what they announced, and then. In the European Council, this was discussed. That's how the European semester works. You discuss your policies with your partners. This was discussed, and here is the conclusion of the European Council. Given the high and further increasing level of debt, and given that previous commitment have not been honored and taken seriously, it is now really high time that France complies with what this green line. It's really the last. It's like when you talk to your children and say, okay, it's the last time I tell you this, and now you'll do it. Okay, that was the idea, and here's what France did. Consequence, none. Okay. Again, I'm not moralizing about this. I'm not surprised. I'm convinced Germany would do the same if it was, if the German government thought it was in the interest of the country, not in the European interest, in the interest of the country to do this. Germany would do the same. Spain would do the same. It's not just France. But this is something we need to understand. This is the way European coordination works, because the national parliaments are elected by, the national electorate, and our governments have the priority to focus on the national interest, whatever they think the national interest is. Okay, it's something we need to understand, and here is, some impressions just from, in that case, German newspapers. France and Italy don't like being lectured. This is a statement by Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the institution which is supposed to protect a European law. He says, these countries just don't like it. I understand it. I sometimes don't like it. When I get a fine for speeding, I don't like it. Okay, but I still have to pay it. But, I'm not a sovereign state. Okay. He just said, they don't like it. Brussels closes both eyes. You remember this was about the Spanish deficit. And about the Spanish deficit, Schäuble, our finance minister, said this. A spokesman of Schäuble said to Spiegel Online the suspension of the fine was, considering all circumstances, understandable. I don't find this understandable at all, I have to say. Absolutely not. Only understandable in the sense that these rules are not binding. they are a more or less friendly exchange of views, and it's something we need to understand. That's why we will never have control over fiscal and economic policies from Brussels that will be strong enough to justify a stronger mutualization of government debt in the Eurozone. We are just not going to have that. And trust, in many of our countries, including my own, in these rules is at an extremely low level. Many policymakers and people from the administration are extremely cynical, let's face it, about the ability of European rules to change the policies of national governments. Okay. You may remember that the Italian Prime Minister Renzi warned Brussels not to say anything about about his policies. The original idea was Brussels would warn the Italian government, but this has been reversed now. Okay, so we just again, I'm not moralizing about this. We just need to understand what's going on, and given that this is the case, I think the future of the Eurozone. Sorry, I'm trying to go back. Yeah, is a decentralized Eurozone with national responsibility for government debt. That is something we need to understand. So it means creditors of countries need to know that they will lose their money if a country gets in too much debt. It doesn't matter whether this is, what the reason for these issues is. But in the end, we need to come to a situation where, there is market discipline for fiscal policy. That will never work perfectly, but the point is, a fundamental principle of governance, national control of government debt means national responsibility. For that to happen, the banking sector needs to be resilient enough to absorb a restructuring of government debt. That's why it didn't work last time. That's why we need to think about the equity underpinning for bond holdings of banks. I can imagine that we can have limited forms of risk sharing, like a fiscal stabilization capacity that insures us against large shocks and so on. We can have that in a decentralized union. It's not that we can have no solidarity, but it has to be precisely a defined solidarity and nothing like mutual responsibility. And the last point about this, and I think this is important, to get to a situation where countries financially rely on themselves and not on the ECB to bail them out or anything else, we need to make sure that we can achieve this without causing a major crisis. If today we said, there will be no more guarantees, for instance, by the ECB to buy government debt in the case of a crisis, the market for the debt of various countries would collapse. It's quite clear. And so that's why we can't do that today. And we have developed a proposal at IFO with a very Germanic name. It's called accountability bonds. I don't want to get into this because it's kind of technical, but the basic idea is, as long as a country remains within European rules, that could be the 0.5% deficit rule all our countries signed in the fiscal compact. We will leave things as they are. We will let banks buy these bonds and so on. As long as we are just talking about the refinancing of government debt, if we think about Italy, for instance, we will leave rules as they are. But if we talk about new debt beyond our fiscal rules, beyond what's been decided jointly, the proposal is that then a country will have to issue junior bonds. So junior bonds, a different kind of bond, and the conditions of this bond would be such that if the country gets into difficulties, these bonds would be restructured first. Banks wouldn't hold them. So the idea is, the existing level of debt is there. We can't do anything about it. So let's, leave solidarity about this debt as it is today, but let's focus on new debt and only the debt beyond what's been decided jointly. And here we can introduce market discipline at the margin. And that would prevent a crisis but move us to a meaningful form of governance. Now, this is the Eurozone. Final point, I think and that's something Macron said yesterday, and I think he's totally right, we need to think hard about potential for further European cooperation in the EU. That's, in my view, this is really the future of the EU. We need to think seriously about this. We cannot focus on the agricultural sector forever. It cannot be the only thing we do together in Europe. So there are many areas of fruitful cooperation, completing the internal market. As I said, focus the EU budget on convergence, have more cooperation in police and border protection, in migration policies, in military procurement. I think there are many things we can do together. It's difficult, because it touches areas of sovereignty. But, I think the real progress in Europe can be achieved in these policy areas, not so much in introducing more risk sharing in the Eurozone, at least not at the fiscal policy level. But we need to think more about these issues here. If we can't agree, we should move on the basis of enhanced cooperation with a limited group of countries, and maybe other countries will join later. But I really think we have to move. I guess my conclusion would be there is huge potential for EU policies which benefit all countries and where European involvement really creates added value. We don't create added value by renovating market squares in the city of Dortmund or by subsidizing farmers, but by having joint cooperation in police, military procurement. I think that will create more value for all of us. And I think that's where the EU should be going. So let's just do it. Thank you.